The Ukraine conflict has caused heavy indebtedness among Eastern European nations. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has caused significant financial losses for neighboring countries. East European governments borrowed nearly $32 billion in the first few months of this year to pay for energy subsidies, military construction, food and education expenses for Ukrainian refugees. Bond market interest rates have increased, putting pressure on borrowing governments. The budget deficit in Eastern Europe is expected to rise to 4.3% of the region's gross domestic product this year. Top European oil company withdraws from Russia. German oil company Wintershall is planning to withdraw from Russia, but this requires several procedures and the completion time is not yet determined. Wintershall previously announced its exit from Russia in January but was unable to execute it due to its interests in the country. The reason for the withdrawal is the imposition of Western sanctions on Russia's energy sector, causing difficulties for the company. Wintershall is expected to incur a loss of €5.3 billion from dissolving its joint ventures in Russia. Tokyo CPI inflation exceeds threshold in April, signaling pressure on BOJ. CPI inflation in Tokyo exceeded expectations in April, reaching 3.5%, higher than the previous month and indicating greater pressure on the Bank of Japan. The price increase is mainly due to rising food and household goods prices, offsetting the decrease in electricity prices. Price levels are forecasted to rise again later this year. Banks ramp up borrowing from Fed's emergency lending program for second week. Banks continue to borrow from the Fed's emergency lending program for the second consecutive week, indicating liquidity strains. Borrowing from the Fed's Bank Term Funding Program increased from $73.98 billion to $81.33 billion. Total borrowing from the Fed's emergency lending programs increased from $316.5 billion to $325.6 billion. The central bank's balance sheet decreased by $30 billion to $8.625 trillion due to its quantitative tightening program. China unexpectedly shifts energy game amid Washington shock. The situation is changing very quickly. China is becoming more involved in the economic competition with the US and the Middle East, as it mediates to restore friendly relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. The Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, headquartered in Beijing, has opened its first office in Abu Dhabi to support AIIB's diplomacy program. China has also signed agreements to buy natural gas from Qatar and become a major customer of the Middle East.